What's going on, everybody? We are back. We got episode number 77 of the Club and Sub podcast. Tonight, we're going to be talking UFC 270. Decent card, co-main, main event, pretty fun. The rest of it, somewhat questionable. It looked a lot better a week ago. But fortunately, in the absence of Luke, Spark Rally Betting, he cannot make it tonight. He is under the weather. We got Craig from Fight Night Picks here joining us for this card. How are you doing, Craig?
I'm doing well, guys. I'm looking forward to this weekend's card. As good as it might be, I could put it that way. But no, I'm really glad to be on the show and looking forward to talking some fights.
Yeah, man, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. And we also got Lags at Danny_Lags and myself, John, who you can find on Twitter at MMA Fox. So without further ado, we'll hop right into it. Undercard, it's a bit on the shaky side. So, Craig, I'll throw it to you because we got a Canadian here. We got Jasmine and John Zavicius taking on Kay Hansen. What are your thoughts?
I mean, Jasmine's 32 making her UFC debut. And if you paid attention to anything Dana White said in the last couple of weeks, we hate to sign these older fighters that are into their 30s. He said it on looking for a fight, not looking forward to a fight. And then you get all these older fighters coming into the UFC this week that are above 30 or just hit the 30 mark. So Jasmine's one of them. She got involved in MMA at 25 is when she kind of found her calling. So later in life, and she kind of uses that as a talking point. But you look at her style, Canadian freestyle wrestling champ. She was a silver medalist there. And that's very much a part of the way that she fights. But she's very much somebody that's going to strike from distance, try and push into the clinch, get the fight down to the mat. You saw that in her last fight on Contender Series. And then comes the issue of, okay, well, she's a decision fighter. And if she doesn't get the finish, then she tends to gas out in her fights. That's not a recipe to win a lot of fights, especially at the highest level. We saw that in her strawweight debut at CFFC against Elise Reed, who was 1-0 at the time. And people might go, man, did she lose to somebody who was 1-0, really? And it was only like 3 fights ago? Yeah. But Elise had a lot of, amateur experience. She's now in the UFC. And forget about her fight that she did have. It's still a decent quality opponent. But if you look at Jasmine in that fight, in this fight, and then a fight coming up, she does struggle as the fight goes longer. Kay Hansen certainly has finishing abilities. She definitely has the higher pedigree of opponent that she's faced in the past. But for Kay, she has experience at 125, 3 fights in the past. One of them she weighed 116 for. So it gives me a little bit of pause. You go over onto Instagram, she looks in great shape. I know Trevin Giles is another fighter kind of experimenting with switching weight classes this weekend. For Kay Hansen, I'm not as worried. She's at a big disadvantage height and reach wise, but I think if she can wrestle and get the first takedown, she should have a decent game plan as to be able to get the win. But like I look at that line, it's chalked up way too much for me.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with you, Craig. To be honest, it's kind of like I'm in like a weird spot here when I'm thinking about it from a betting perspective. You did a pretty good job breaking down the fight. But like on the one hand, we've talked about it quite a bit before. Size matters for a reason. We got Kay Hansen going up to 125 pounds here. She hasn't fought there for a reason. She's 5'2". She's a 63-inch reach. She is not, a big 115 pounder, and yet she's moving up to flyweight here. Why? I'm not really entirely sure. But you saw this, I don't know, 3 months back. We had Luana Carolina taking on Lupita Godinez. Lupita Godinez is a superior wrestler to Kay Hansen, in my opinion. And Luana Carolina is a poor defensive grappler. And we saw her struggle badly to take her down, just having to deal with the height and the size. And I kind of think we might see something a bit similar here. I think Hansen could have some success early, possibly, but if the takedown stopped coming, it wouldn't totally shock me. And as you touched on, Craig, Jasmine does have a wrestling background. I wouldn't say her wrestling is good per se for the UFC, but it's not like she doesn't know what she's doing. And on the feet, Kay is just not really a very good striker. I don't know if I'm going to bet Jasmine. I may. I just generally get queasy about the idea of betting debutantes off the Contender Series. So it's kind of a tough ask for me to play her here. But, I mean, if the line keeps moving, I might. There's more reasons to play Jasmine than there is to think about betting Kay Hansen or parlaying her up or anything. Lags, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a good closing point there. It's just like, how can you really lay Kay Hansen minus 225 here? It's like, my new goal, I'd say, for 2022, learning from 2021 mistakes, is just betting on people without a reliable wrestling game. I would say. I know I've been laying chalk on that time and time again in 2021, and obviously I'm not going to do it here in a low level 2022 women's MMA fight. So It's a pass for me too.
Yeah, fair. So moving on, we got Matt the Steamroller Frivola, Long Island's own, taking on another debutant off the Contender Series, Genaro Valdez. Lags, what are your thoughts here?
This actually prelim fight does get me pumped up, though. I think there's going to be a ton of violence in this fight, and I actually am looking to play the under 2.5. It's still at minus 135. I don't mind it. I know I missed a little bit of the early action. I know it was about even money early in the week, but I like it there. I think Rivola's got a huge grappling edge, and I think that on the feet, Valdez is going to go ape shit, really. So I think it's either Matt's going to be able to get him to the mat and find a sub, or Valdez is able to knock out the chinny Frivola.
Yeah, Craig, what's your take on this? Any strong feelings one way or the other?
If Matt's brother's out there in the comment section, because he has popped up in a lot of comment sections. So James, if you're out there, listen, I know we made points for and against Matt Frivola in our videos, but yeah, I mean, you summed it up well. Matt Frivola, great wrestling, unless you're able to knock him out fairly quickly. We saw Martin Bravo, no longer in the UFC, knocked him out fairly quickly. Terrence McKinney is very good in that respect, but Terrence McKinney's Terrence McKinney, and Matt Frivola went out in the quickest fashion possible. So when I look at that fight, Valdez is one of those guys that, like you said, swings his hands at everything into a clinch, into a high crotch single leg, and then puts every bit of momentum he has into that takedown and puts his weight into it. That's not good as fights go on. And then if you look at his last fight against Patrick White, same thing. Like, those guys are slugging it out for a round. And at the end of it, White's corner's like, hey, you got to finish this fight, because he pretty much had Valdez finished. And then at the second round, it was like, oh, he's got him finished. And then Valdez comes back. So I know there's a lot of Entram Gym guys and gal, I guess, on this card. But when I look at it, yeah, Frivola has such an advantage in the grappling. I think he's going to be able to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. To be honest, like, this is another one. Like, I don't have many bets in place on this card, but it's like every instinct in my body says probably should bet Frivola here. The idea of playing minus 200 makes me a bit uncomfortable. But yeah, I mean, like Craig just said, skill-wise, I don't particularly rate Frivola's striking, but I don't think he's a worse technical. I think he's a better technical striker than Genaro Valdez does. There's a pretty wide gap on the mat, Frivola trains with Aljamain Sterling and Merab Dvalishvili, or he did for years and years. He's a Sarah guy. He knows what he's doing. He's got pretty good jiu-jitsu. He's a decent wrestler. I guess, like I said, the big concern for me is the guy has been hurt in literally every fight in the UFC. He's gotten put out cold a couple times. When exchanges get extended in the pocket, he is just there to get hurt. And like you saw, I mean, Luis Pena almost finished him. And Luis Pena has pillow fists. Got finished by Polo Reyes, Martin Bravo. Got hurt by Jalen Turner, which that's nothing wrong with that. But it's happened enough times now where it's like, I don't want to say he's chinny, like he gets touched and he goes out, but his defense is poor enough that, he'll be in a position to get finished if he stands for extended periods. And the only, Genaro Valdez might legitimately be the worst prospect ever signed off the Contender Series. It was actually remarkable watching back his fight with Patrick White. Amazing fight to watch, by the way. It was as entertaining as it gets, but it was remarkably poor technically. But what Valdez does do, and what concerns me a bit, is the guy is going to bite the mouthpiece and come for Frivola. He's not going to sit there and just lose a point fighting based fight. He's going to go at him. I think he's got a shot to get him out of there. To be honest, Lags touched on it, but I think what I really like here is the under, because I do think if Frivola goes to wrestle, there's a huge gap in jiu-jitsu and wrestling. And on the feet, look, they're going to swing. Valdez is not going to give him any breaks in there, which is pretty much exactly what you're looking for in an under. So I like the under here. It's an interesting fight. I can't really hate on a Frivola play. Matt, I'm going to swing it back to you here. We got Vanessa Demopolis taking on Silvana Gomez. Craig, sorry, I am an idiot.
Whatever.
We're gonna get Matt on soon, because I thought it was gonna be 4 of us, so 5 of us would be tough.
But anyway, the rebook: Silvana Juarez, Vanessa Demopolis. What do you got?
So if you look at Genaro Valdez and Matt Frivola, and you look at last weekend, Borshev taking on the man himself, Dakota Bush. I mean, it's a wrestler and a striker, right? And if you watch Silvana Gomez Juarez outside of the UFC, forget about her fight against Godinez. You already mentioned it. Godinez, very good wrestler. That super, super short notice fight up a weight class against Luana Carolina. I'm not gonna get mad about that one, but if you do look at Silvana Gomez Juarez outside of the UFC, she's one of the most aggressive strikers possible. She puts together great combinations. She can hit right down the pocket. You talk about somebody that bites down on a mouthpiece. Very, very good. She has title experience outside of, the UFC, but in bigger promotions like KSW. She has big time fights on her record. She's also 37, which is kind of scary. And Vanessa Demopolis is kind of like one of those prospects that, is she a prospect or did she already age out? She's 33. She has a great grappling pedigree, and I can go down through it. Pan American champ, so on and so forth. But when she hangs in the pocket for too long, like a lot of these grapplers, that's when she starts to get in trouble and her cardio can start to fade off. When I look at her last fight, same thing. Super short notice, up a weight class against JJ Aldrich, just a wet blanket. So I look at it for what it's worth. Forget about the Godinez fight. Forget about the Aldrich fight. Put them both together. Gomez Juarez is a great striker. Demopolis is a decent striker and a pretty darn good grappler. So I like Demopolis in this one. But again, she's a big favorite. Like, it kind of scares me a little bit.
Yeah, I don't disagree terribly much. Like, I think I'm pretty actively looking to fade to Vanessa Demopolis whenever I can get a reasonable line. But like what I will say about her is like she's not very skilled in MMA. Yes, she's a decent submission grappler, but she has some physical attributes that I've always kind of just felt like if she was to say, okay, I'm not going to take a fight for a year instead of fighting 6 times in 15 months or 18 months and actually went and learned how to throw a jab or like string together combinations well, just like basically learned any kind of striking, she might be decent. She is pretty durable. She's tough. She's got good cardio. She'll throw a lot of output on the feet. Those are characteristics in WMA that are invaluable. The problem for her is she's just not very good technically at anything. Like she just basically needs more time and more reps in the gym. Unfortunately, she's not getting them. Juarez, I'm not very impressed with. Like, yeah, she looked good regionally, but she hasn't looked good against anybody that matters. Her defense is kind of suspect, as you touched on, Craig. She's 37 years old. This is kind of the end of the line, even though it's only her second fight in the UFC. I do think there's a reasonable chance she could get on top of Demopolis here and, maybe win a fight via top time. But I don't know. Like, I trust Demopolis' output a bit more on the feet. And in the grappling, it's just like Demopolis' guard is slick enough that, like, if you're not, like, good grapplers will dominate her, but I'm not sure I would categorize Juarez as a good grappler. And, like, I can just easily imagine her getting armbarred here or conceding position fairly easily. So my pick's Demopolis. I'm not like very passionate about it though. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, again, like similar to the Hansen fight, in my opinion, at least. I think this is a pretty low-level women's fight that I mean, I could see either girl really getting off on their game and like looking like a minus 150 type of favorite, and we're just looking at it like, okay, like that makes sense, like fairly pick-em-ish type of fight, and that's where we're at. I personally, I think that Juarez, her striking is a little bit better, and I think that'll carry her way to a decision, but not really a strong take from me.
Well, I'm going to stick with you here, Lags. As we move on, fourth fight of the evening, we got Tony Gravely taking on Simone Oliveira. What are your thoughts?
So I think similar to the Frivola fight, I'm actually looking at a play at the under 2.5 here at plus 110. I think that in the grappling realm and in the striking, I think Tony's got this guy covered. I think that standing, I think he hits harder than Oliveira. I think that pretty much the question is, can Tony avoid the guillotine for 15 minutes? I that's really my only question, I would say. And I think that the cardio aspect for both of these guys, I don't think either of their cardios is very good. So I like the under here. I think Tony can pound him out on the mat. And Oliveira's live for an early guillotine.
Craig, what are your thoughts?
Pounding him out on the mat. Can't wait for it. No, I mean, when I look at that fight, Gravely obviously has the championship experience. He was one of those guys that when he fought Ray Rodriguez on Contender Series, that was one of those like, man, these guys are regional champs. What would happen if they fought? And obviously, you look at it for Gravely, he's got a fight in the night against Brett Johns in the UFC, and Ray Rodriguez has been Ray Rodriguez. It's been pretty underwhelming. So when I look at this fight, you're right. With Simon Oliveira, he comes out with that super high tie guard, and he does have those good defensive submissions. Like you can look at fighters like Nick Lentz or Brian Kelleher as similarities. But Nick Lentz, while he might not have been the best striker, I'd still rate his striking higher than Oliveira's. And if you look at it for Brian Kelleher, Kelleher is even a better striker. So when I look at this fight, Oliveira, well, he comes out of a decent gym, Astra fight team in Brazil. He's another one of those guys that I look and I go, geez, this guy's pretty old for a prospect, and he's 18-3, and he's taken on a guy with good experience in the UFC, good experience outside of the UFC, really good wrestling. not the best chin, but pretty good boxing in his own right. So for those reasons, I like Gravely. And if you like him inside the distance, I couldn't fault you on that either.
Yeah, I'll complete it, I guess. I don't have a bet here yet at the moment. I do think Gravely's a superior fighter, though. I bet Jose Alday against Simon Oliveira in his last fight in the Contenders. Unsuccessful bet, obviously, since Simon Oliveira is here fighting in the UFC. But I just look, he's got a relatively slick front choke game. But outside of that, I don't really see a whole lot of other tools at a UFC level. Like, I don't rate Gravely as a striker much. But, he hits pretty hard and he'll throw, and that might be enough on the feet here. And in terms of the wrestling, look, I worry about Tony Gravely putting himself in poor positions on the mat consistently because he makes a lot of bad decisions. But he's a superior wrestler. Like, his pedigree is way better. If he is intelligent about his approach here, he should be able to just take Oliveira down and dominate him on the mat. Largely, I think the line's right. I don't have a thought to add to what either of you guys said. I just can't trust Gravely enough to ever lay minus 275 on him again, not after that Nate Maness disaster. So, yeah. We'll move on. We got Jack Della Maddalena taking on. Did you not say anything yet, Lex?
No, I was saying we won't talk about that fight.
Oh, yeah.
Fight, we won't talk about it.
Taking on Pete Rodriguez. Craig, have you had a chance to do tape on Pete Rodriguez?
Yeah, have you guys? Because it's pretty quick.
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
About 5 minutes.
And any opportunity I've had, I have this to say, because normally what we try and do is we go a lot of positives, a few negatives, end on a positive, and then make your pick. And you try and state your case for both guys. And honest to goodness, I don't have a single negative thing to say about Pete Rodriguez. I mean, really, like, his fights end very quickly. He knocks these guys out. You don't get a big opportunity to see his skill set. How good is his wrestling? I don't know. How good is his volume? Honest to goodness, again, I don't really know. All I see is this guy whiffs the biggest power punches you've ever seen for a small guy at welterweight too. Like, keep this in mind. He's had 4 pro fights, 2 of them at 175, 1 at 165, 1 at 170. And you look at the guys, what, 5'9"? That's what they list him as.
Little guy.
But he's a chunky, 5'9" at 170. So when I look at his tape and I consider everything, and then I look at Jack Della, could Jack Della get knocked out? Sure. He takes a lot of shots. And this is a guy that moves his feet well, forward and backwards, side to side, moves incredibly well, moves his head well, but he still eats a lot of shots. And he has very, very entertaining fights. But I've seen so much more to Jack Della. I've seen big improvements from, obviously, the 2 losses he had at the start of his career to the, hey, coach, I'm winning 10 in a row, making it to the UFC. Like, this guy, to me, Jack Della, is one of those special prospects. I don't know if he's ever going to make it to the rankings. He's one of those guys that's going to, eventually fight like Alex Oliveira, unless they cut him after his next fight. So to me, I really think highly of Jack Della, and I don't really have a lot to say about 4-0 prospects coming into the UFC. So if you like him, you like him. But yeah, I've got Jack Della here.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Della Maddalena is kind of an interesting guy, as you said, Craig. It's funny because when I was taping Della Maddalena, I obviously saw his Contender Series fight when it happened, but I didn't have a lot of familiarity with him outside of it. And going back to his tape, there was if you had took the Contender Series tape out of consideration, I would have been like, what the fuck is this guy doing in the UFC, to be honest with you? Because I honestly thought his CW tape, I actually was very unimpressed with. His volume wasn't very reliable. There seemed to be some real questions about his grappling. The only thing he seemed to have was fairly good durability and power. But then you look at his Contender Series fight, and the guy comes out and puts out an output cardio clinic there. He lands 100 significant strikes over 15 minutes at a division where no one is really doing that at 170 pounds. I still think there's some pretty big questions about his grappling. Like, I know he gets a lot of credit for getting out of the arm triangle, but it's like using a bunch of explosive energy to get out of a submission attempt doesn't really tell me anything about your actual submission defensive ability. But like I said, look, the guy's got obviously good cardio. He's got a good boxing. He's got good movement. He has great output, or he did last fight anyway. That'll take him a long way. And like you said, Pete Rodriguez, I don't even know what he is. The one thing I'll say is his cardio seems decent. I did find a fight from him as an amateur that he went 15 minutes where the guy grinded him pretty hard, but his cardio looked fine in the 3rd round, despite being, taken down over and over and over again that fight. So he does seem to have reasonable cardio, but yeah, I mean, he seems like a blown out lightweight to me. Like, he almost seems like the version at welterweight of what Kelvin Gastelum is at middleweight. Just a guy who is way too stocky for the division, but really should be ideally fighting down a weight class. I don't know. I guess his boxing seems okay. I guess he hits hard. I'm really kind of perplexed at how the UFC decided, like, circled him and we're like, this guy with 4 fights against nobody's in Mexico is the guy who should come in here and fight Della Maddalena. But they did. I don't know a lot about him. I think Jack probably handles him fairly easily. But again, like, I wouldn't put my money there. We don't have no idea what Pete Rodriguez is. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you too. Like Jack's aside, but it's like with how hittable he is, Craig mentioned it. I don't know how you could really lay this minus 300 number on him. So yeah, for me, it's pretty short and simple. 4 fights for Pete. I don't think there's much to go off of. I think he hits pretty hard, but it's tough to really lay this kind of number.
Yeah, agree completely. Moving on, we got a good one here. We got Michael Morales making his debut off the Contender Series. He's fighting Trevin Giles. And I actually do have a not passionate take, but a take here. I like Trevin Giles here. I don't really think Trevin Giles is an underdog to pretty much any Contender Series debutant makes much sense. But Michael Morales in particular, look, the kid's 22, 23 years old. If you go back and watch the guys he's fought regionally, he's not fighting very good competition. Even his Contender Series fight, before Vretnikov slowed down in that fight, he was getting pieced up on the feet. In the grappling, I think, look, he comes from a wrestling background, but he looked pretty suspect when he ended up on bottom. And so I don't really see, other than the fact that Morales is tall with a very long reach, I don't see a whole lot of or any advantages for him really here. Perhaps he can get Trevin Giles down, but I don't really think he's going to be able to do much with it. And I think Giles actually has a higher grappling upside. And in the striking, look, Morales is very, very hittable. I don't think he's the most educated striker in the world. I have my issues with Giles. Look, the guy has horrible fight IQ. He is extraordinarily low output. But the reality is he's pretty fast. He's got a nice jab. He's got good pocket boxing, and he hits pretty hard. Really, Trevin Giles shouldn't have many issues here. He should be able to just jab for 15 minutes or grapple if he needs to and win the fight pretty handily. Again, the volume concerns me. The fight IQ concerns me. The fact that he came out against Dricus with his hands all the way down like he was Conor McGregor concerns me. That's why I'm very, very small on him. But ultimately, when I was thinking about the fight, I'm just like, how do I have a guy who's fought in no one and a guy with Trevin Giles with 10 UFC fights who's reasonably young. How am I not betting Trevin Giles as an underdog? So I like Giles here. I think it should be a pretty good fight for him. I'm sure he'll do his best to make it difficult, but he should win this fight. Lags, what do you think?
And picking up where you left off, I think that's really the reason why I'm staying off of Giles here. I think at the small number plus 105 where it's at now, I think that all the red flags, the low output, his cardio, and just the fact that he just has propensity just to do dumb shit in the ring, it just kind of happens. He leaves his hands down low all the time. So I think this is a solid spot for Giles. He could look minus 150, minus 160 here, but I have no interest at him at a small dog price. How
about you, Craig? Any strong feelings here?
No. You know what? Honestly, I said at the start of the week, I've got Michael Morales, 3-time Ecuadorian national wrestling champion, national champion of Muay Thai as well, but that doesn't really show out in his fights because he just kind of walks forward and throws his hands out there. And he's got the longest reach you're ever going to see. I think it's 79 inches and he's 6 feet tall. I just want to see what Trevin Giles looks like on the scale. We've seen him on Instagram. He looks cut up. He looks great. But the scary thing is, if you look at his pictures, he's cut up at 205. He's cut up at 185. And then he's cut up wherever he is right now. Where was that before? It's just kind of weird. So awesome commitment to, making the weight. And I'm sure it won't be an issue. But I just want to see these two guys face off because Morales definitely has some issues. But Giles strikes like he's Andrew Sanchez with a ton of confidence. So that kind of scares me when you're just bouncing in and out. And the craziest thing is in that Duplessis fight, he throws a 3 or 4 punch combo up against the cage. And you're thinking, man, he's going to finish this fight. And then he just hits a shot and it's over. So I don't necessarily have a ton of confidence in either guy. I think you just stay away from this fight.
Yeah, that Duplessis fight was maximum pain. It literally went from, he's finding his way into this fight. Now it's Giles' time to cool. I'm going to go light $500 on fire. That's fun times. Moving on, though, we have a fight that, again, we're breaking down for the second time. We got Raoni Barcelos taking on Victor Henry. Lags, what are your thoughts here?
I don't think much has changed from the first time we talked about this fight. I think this is perfect spot for Raoni to come back. Minus 500 might seem a little wide in hindsight, but I think he's got him covered on the feet. I think he's got him covered on the ground. I think he's got a huge grappling edge here. I think Howney by sub at 5-1 is probably a good look here. Me personally, I'm probably just gonna maybe have a small play on him by sub or decision at -120. But outside of that, no real interest here. I think this is a solid spot for Howney.
How about you, Craig?
Oh, what have we got for a decision on this one in general? I'll find it. It's not great, is it? Fight goes the distance. +120.
It's not horrible.
Oh, is it? Oh, I thought it was. Okay, never mind.
No, I mean, if I'm going with anything, it's probably that. Howney's a great fighter, 100%. But when you look at Victor Henry, he definitely has a jiu-jitsu pedigree. I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to add from, the time this fight was booked, like 3 weeks ago, a month ago now.
Yeah.
Unfortunate that I got pushed this far down the way, but it's definitely a showcase fight for one of these two guys. It's not Victor Henry.
Yeah, agreed completely. I don't have much to add from what I said a few weeks ago. I had a big bet on Barcelos at -290. Obviously, with the new line at -500, I no longer have a bet on him. It's a bit frustrating, if I'm being completely honest, to beat the line by $2 and then have it disappear on you, only to get rebooked at the way we're close.
Yeah.
But that's the game. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Victor Henry gets a lot of props because he beat Kyler Phillips. But if you watch that fight, Phillips absolutely dusted him in the first round, then gassed out, and Henry kind of just out-cardioed him. Henry seems okay. He's got decent output, decent kicking game, but he can't wrestle, and he has virtually no boxing defense. Two places where Peone just absolutely excels. He should dominate this fight and do whatever he wants to. Henry could get some wins in the UFC, but this is a pretty tough ask as your first fight, if I'm being honest. Moving on, we got Ilia Topuria taking on Charles Jourdain. I will let our Canadian here break down the Canadian fighting here. What are your thoughts here, Greg?
Well, John over in the chat or in the comment section, where's the it's a weird bucket of muscles, John. Come on, you should know that. But this fight is a weird bucket of muscles because we have a guy that's not a grappler in the Canadian taking on one of the best grapplers that you're going to find in this division in Ilia Topuria. And if you watch Ilia, you know that he's not just a grappler. He can box your head in. And I mean, you look at the fight against Damon Jackson as an example. And this is a guy that Breon Boulon really kind of turned me on to him, I guess, so to speak, in that Cage Warriors title fight. So I've really kind of had my eye on Ilia since then. This guy's a special prospect. This guy's a future ranked contender. And the thing that scares me about Jourdain is the fact that when he's backed up against the cage, he has good takedown defense when you go to try and wrestle his upper body. But as soon as you try and go for his legs, he gets taken down quite easily. That's Topuria's bread and butter. So for that reason, I have Topuria. And I think it's going to be a pretty quick one. I see a lot of people out there, but what if he works the body kick? You don't think in the week or so that that's all Ilia's been drilling? So, yeah, I like Topuria in this one. It's a shame. It's a shame to be a Canadian, have to pick against the Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, look, I more or less agree with your breakdown. Like, I think Topuria is going to win this fight, but I do think the line might be a tad wide, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, I love Ilia Topuria. I love him as a prospect. I mean, I bet him big against Yusuf Zalal. I bet him against Damon Jackson. He does a lot of stuff I like, and he's a young kid who's only going to get better. But, there are some realities about Topuria that, he hasn't had a tough fight in the UFC yet. Yusuf Zalal, not really UFC caliber, for being honest, was fortunate enough to have 3 layup opponents in a row to open his career. Damon Jackson's solid, but Damon Jackson, whenever anybody's really pressured him on pressure boxed him, has collapsed pretty much throughout his entire career. And then Ryan Hall, who just, if Hall doesn't have a big jiu-jitsu advantage, he kind of doesn't really have a whole lot else to threaten you with. I mean, Taylor made a matchup for Topuria to get him into the top 15. So really, I don't think he's that proven. And to be honest, like, the guy has almost never fought in the third round his whole career. And if you look at the one time he did against Yusuf Zalal, he gassed out pretty horrendously in that fight down the stretch there. Could barely stand at the end of it. As a striker, striking looked good against Damon Jackson, but again, he hasn't fought anybody who really can hit him back in the face yet. To me, the question is really, how likely is he to go out there and sub Jourdain right off the bat? Because I kind of think if he has to use, he does everything Topuria does is explosive energy, and if he can't sub Jourdain quickly, I kind of think it becomes a pretty competitive fight in rounds 2 and 3. Look, Jourdain isn't a very good defensive wrestler, as you touched on, Craig, but he does have a black belt. He's not somebody who I think is liable to get taken down and insta-tapped. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but just my gut. I don't think he's completely dead in scrambles. And look, if he can get to the feet, look, first of all, Jourdain is obviously a very dangerous striker. It's what he excels at. But on the feet, it's going to be dicey. Like if they stood there and traded shots for 15 minutes, I'd say it's probably about an even fight, if I'm being honest, just without the data on Topuria striking, really. I don't know. I think Topuria should be about minus 300, if I'm being honest. But like if I get plus 500 on Jourdain, I'm probably going to take a small shot here. Legs, what do you think?
I don't really disagree with anything you said there, John. It's just that I think that this being on such short notice for Jourdain, I think presents a lot of problems. And I think that Topuria, even like 2 rounds of solid top time here, if he doesn't end up finding the sub, I think would be enough to find a decision win. So I think, yeah, you said it best at the end there. I think Topuria minus 300, probably about right. This line's obviously getting a bit wide, but I think it's not too bad. It's a solid spot for him.
Yeah, fair. I'll kick it to you here, too. I know you have a bet here. We have a Brazilian versus Brazilian showdown. We got Rodolfo Vieira taking on Wellington Turman. What are your thoughts?
Well, Craig, I know you said on Clint's show anybody's crazy putting money on Wellington Turman here. But you got 2 guys here putting money on Wellington Turman.
What?
Yeah, pretty much to me, yeah.
Oh.
I'll start it off, though. Pretty much to me, it comes down to, I think, this current line, I think if you think that Vieira subs him inside the first round at a pretty quick clip, I would say that the line's justified. But outside of that, I just don't really see it because I think that Rodolfo's Vieira's striking, his striking defense, both pretty poor. His cardio's poor. I mean, to me, it's a sub 1 or bust for Rodolfo. I mean, I think a lot of people are overrating his last performance against Stoltzfus because he's just not a very UFC caliber opponent. And then, I just think kind of they're just playing little apples and oranges there. But yeah, I think it's a decent spot for Turman. I don't love the guy. Obviously, he's not great by any means, but I think he's a solid archetype to beat Rodolfo. So give me 1 unit plus 225.
What do you think here, Craig? Clearly you don't agree.
Well, I mean, I sold all the Wolf tickets on Vieira before he gets subbed by Fluffy. But when I look at this fight, yeah, the one thing that I keep reading in the comment section all week, and I just can't wrap my head around it, is, man, Vieira, his striking's so much better from his last fight. You guys you're not talking about it enough. You're not talking about his jab. Yeah, okay, he threw a jab, and his cardio's, when you're just throwing a jab and you're not eating any shots back, then yeah, it makes you look a lot better than you really are. But when I look at this fight, I mean, Vieira's one of those guys, like you had said, he just powers into his takedowns. And normally he gets them, right? I mean, Oscar Piata, who was supposed to be pretty good at a Cage Warriors. Like, you look at his other fights, and he just takes these guys down, rips them down. Saparbek Safarov, he got pretty hurt in that fight, and if he didn't submit him, he would have lost that fight. Like, it would have been a TKO loss. So if you look at this fight against Wellington, I think Wellington definitely has a striking advantage. He's not a giant volume puncher by any chance. He's a negative striker in the UFC. I'm kind of surprised he's at this point in his career in the UFC because I thought he was going to be a lot better. I really did. As a young prospect that kind of was sold as having all these talents, but really hasn't had all of these talents. The one thing that concerns me in this fight is Wellington, if he's training over at Teixeira's, hopefully it's just to work on the striking and not the submission abilities, because we saw what happened in this fight against Bruno Silva when he thought, hey, well, we grappled in the past. Let's goof around. That's why I think that Rodolfo is going to be able to get the win, and I think he's going to be able to submit him in this one. But I've been wrong on Rodolfo before.
Yeah, so I guess the way I look at this fight, like, I have it pretty close to evens. Like, I don't have a big bet on Turman, but I do have a bet on him. To kind of what Lag said, there's very, very few guys that I think Vieira should be minus 200 against, period, in the UFC. There's not really terribly much evidence for it. The guy just, for Vieira to be minus 200, he has to be able to dominate on the mat, right? And we know that if he does pursue that aggressively, he doesn't have the cardio really to push this fight deep. So the question kind of becomes, well, can he, just easily submit Turman? And Turman's a black belt, but we don't really know how much stock that has. I personally don't think he has the best jiu-jitsu I've ever seen. It's not very positionally sound as offensively. Not a lot of data on his back, so it's hard to know what to make of it. But he's a young kid. He's a big guy. He's 25 years old. He's pretty athletic. Yeah, so that's the big question. But I'd be pretty surprised if Turman is an easy insta-sub here. And in terms of the fight itself, Craig, like, you kind of nailed it. And I've been saying this like all week. I don't see Vieira striking improvements. What I saw was someone who was a bit more willing to strike, He was a more willing striker, but it wasn't really like all he did was throw a jab. And on top of that, he only attempted 84 strikes over 15 minutes. Like that is not much of an output, if I'm being honest. His head was dead on the center line the entire time. He looked like he was getting tired midway through round 2 in a very, very, very low-paced fight, you know? Look, Turman's a terrible striker. Do not get me wrong. He is not a good striker, but what Turman is a guy who will at least push a pace, whether that's in the clinch, trying to grapple you there, or at distance. And a pace is the one thing Vieira can't really deal with. You know, Stoltzfus didn't push a pace at all in that fight. And so I think Turman can give him issues at distance, and I think he can really give him issues in the clinch. To be honest, I kind of think Vieira needs to hit like takedowns reactive. I don't really think like Turman's very, very good at pummeling for underhooks in the clinch. I'd be pretty surprised if Vieira can just press him to the fence and drag him down here. I don't think that's going to come very easy. So yeah, I mean, I think this fight should be around evens. I think the line is kind of crazy. I'm going to bring in Hansen. No one can see you right now. What are you doing? You're on mute. Turman Vieira. Okay, he's gone. All right. Anyway, that is Turman Vieira. I like Turman. Lags like Turman. Craig thinks Vieira is going to take it here. Moving on, we got Cody Stamen taking on Said Nurmagomedov. What are your thoughts here, Craig?
I mean, do I have to have any strong feelings about this one? Like, Said Nurmagomedov's been off for a long time. He's a very flashy striker. He's an interesting prospect. He's supposed to win this fight. Cody Stamen's not. That's pretty much it, right? Would you guys agree on that? I'm seeing some head nods, right? Like, Cody Stamen is a wrestler. He's not a wrestle boxer. He's a wrestler. And positionally, you know, he leaves a lot to be desired. Like, he's a fun guy that way, but people aren't into watching pay-per-view main cards for this type of stuff. They're not getting excited for a fight like this. They're getting excited for Nurmagomedov, which you assume Nurmagomedov is going to win. I assume Nurmagomedov is going to win here. I assume it's going to go to decision too.
Yeah, I agree. I assume he's going to win. I should take that back. I don't really agree. Look,
right,
I bet Stamen here. Again, it's another fight that I think, you know, there's decent credence for the line being evens. I struggle to see how you can make Said much of a favorite. I mean, you just look at their careers. Look at the guys who Cody Stamen's lost to. Jimmy Rivera, who at the time he left the UFC was ranked in the top 10. Merab Dvalishvili, who's probably a top 3 to 5 guy right now, and Aljamain Sterling, who's the current champion. Whether you agree with that statement or not, the reality is he's the current champion. And look, I mean, Stamen has a kind of style that you do want in, you know, a fighter, which is decent output. He wrestles a lot. He attempts a lot of takedowns. You know, that's the kind of stuff that's going to win you minutes, and he's fairly durable. Said, it's funny because before I taped it, I thought I'd be huge on Stamen. But after taping it, look, I do think there are issues Nurmagomedov could give Stamen here. Like, he's much longer. He's much taller. He's clearly the more educated striker. He's got better movement. Stamen getting stuck on the outside and not being able to close distance wouldn't totally surprise me here. But I think the closest comp to this fight, and I'm not saying they're similar fighters, but it's probably the Sterling fight, because Sterling's distance striking is a bit similar to Nurmagomedov's in some ways, with a very, very kick-heavy approach, a lot of spins, doesn't do a whole lot of boxing. And he actually handled the striking in that fight okay. Like, not that he won it, but, you know, he didn't seem overwhelmed. And something I did notice that seems important here is he pretty much attempted a takedown anytime Sterling tried to spin. And Nurmagomedov spins pretty much constantly. I kind of think Stamen has a pretty viable path to landing 4 to 5 takedowns, just blanketing him on the fence here. We'll see. If he cannot have big wrestling success, he's going to get pieced up on the outside. But I don't know. It's like I have a proven guy in Cody Stamen who's a proven top 15 guy taking on the guy who beat Mark Striegel, you know, as an underdog. I'm going to take Stamen in that spot all day. What are your thoughts here, Lags?
Yeah, kind of similar to Craig here. You know, I don't really have any strong takes. I kind of think Said, like you touched on, I think that 6-inch reach advantage, I think is going to be huge. It wouldn't shock me if he keeps Cody on the outside. And then the only really question I would say is, if you're on the Cody side, why not just take him by decision at like plus 260, plus 270? Because if he's going to win, it's largely a wrestle-based decision. Doesn't have a ton of finishing ability. Said seems pretty tough.
Yeah, that's a reasonable take. I don't totally disagree. We'll move on. We got the feature bout of the evening. We got Michel Pereira coming back, taking on Andre Fialho. Craig, you said something interesting about this fight before we went live. You want to take this away?
I've got Andre Fialho in this fight, and I'm not afraid to say it. I mean, I look at Michelle, and I look at, we talked about other fighters in this card, right? The fade in the third round. Michelle's one of those guys that if you pressure him, or if you get him late into a fight, he fades. Now, Zlimim Madaev wasn't able to do it. Like, Chaos Williams wasn't able to do it, but Chaos Williams was pretty hesitant in that fight. And then you look at a guy like Andrea Fialho, and yeah, you can knock the fights that he had, 2020, and the losses, and the no contest, and whatever. But you look at the guys that he fought. I mean, Chris Curtis at 170 was a good fighter. Chris Curtis at 185 in the UFC is like I don't know. He could challenge for the title tomorrow, right? Yeah, exactly. Glyco Franca, the no contest. Well, he popped for steroids after the fight. So how do you consider it? Plus, if you watch that fight, it was really close. And in that fight, Fialho hurt Franca quite a few different times. And then his fight against Dos Santos, I consider that one a bit of a wash. And then I look at this year in 2021 or last year, and he's looked amazing. Now, the one thing that everybody hammers home, what is it? James Vick sucks and his chin's bad. Yeah. But when we can kind of see how you defend against some of those long range weapons, the long range kicks, worry about a whole first round of that where James Vick looks pretty good. And then in the second round, close the distance, initiate your boxing and finish him. That sets you up pretty well. Then he goes on to win 3 more fights, knocks out Stefan Seklich, who should have beaten Dwight Grant last year, but he didn't because the judges had it out for him. But when you look at the way he knocks him out, it's going for a takedown, just throws an elbow in there, and Bob's your uncle. So I look at Andre Fialho. He has great boxing. If he threw a few more kicks, he'd be a very special fighter. I think Andre Fialho, with his pace, with his cardio, I think he's going to win this fight up against Pereira. And I look at Pereira as a fun fighter, a good fighter. But to me, this is one, like, I don't have him winning in the spot.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting. You know, if you look at Pereira pre-UFC to Pereira post-Conley fight, he's basically been, and to be honest, a better fighter, but he's been a completely different fighter since then. You know, he's really been, like you touched on the Chaos Williams fight, you had 2 counter guys. Pereira turned into a counterpuncher, basically. And, you know, as a result, I mean, even the James Vick fight, you know, he's looked to minimize exchanges wherever possible. He doesn't wrestle that much, I'm sure, because of the gas tank issues. But, you know, I actually I don't want to say I think Pereira should be ranked, nothing like that, but I think he actually has like developed somewhat of a decent game. You know, he is good at minimizing exchanges. He manages distance well. He moves pretty well. He's a pretty strong defensive grappler. And that's going to probably serve him well in a division where there's not a lot of other guys with that skill set. But, you know, you mentioned it, Craig, and the scary thing for me here is kind of the pace, you know, that Fialho could potentially bring. Look, he could knock Pereira out. You know, Dusko Todorovic did regionally. You know, I don't think it's impossible to finish Pereira. I don't think it's super likely, but I do kind of think, you know, even when guys like Imadaev tried to go forward on him and Pereira just kind of ring crafted his way around that fight, you know, he minimized exchanges to an insane degree. But even then, when Imadaev was trying to throw volume, he didn't really return fire a whole lot. And that kind of worries me because the level difference between him and Imadaev was just vast. The reality is Imadaev had some hype on him, but he just really wasn't a UFC caliber fighter. I actually think Fialho's a decent fighter. I don't really know if I want to bet him, but Fialho's pace is enough that it's like I could very easily imagine him just winning a 29-28 on just doing things while Pereira just tries to circle around the cage, you know? Something I think is kind of interesting is the over here. It's plus money, and like Pereira post Connolly fight, Pereira just doesn't really straight. He doesn't throw combinations when he does counter. He tends to just try to jab and get off the center line. You know, even the Nico Price fight, Price is a great fighter for unders, and Pereira tried to avoid exchanges at all costs in that fight until he got on top of him. I think the over is kind of interesting. I think goes the distance is kind of interesting. I don't know if I'll bet him, but that's kind of where my head is at. Lags, what do you think?
I think the over is interesting too, a little bit, to agree, because I also think that, not that I would ever lay this kind of number with Michelle, but I think he does have a grappling upside if he chooses to. I don't think Fialho's get-ups are great. I think that his defensive grappling in general isn't that good. I think his striking defense isn't that great either. Like it wouldn't shock me if Pereira gets a late finish here, but it's like how much are you trying to trust Pereira getting a late finish here with the cardio that he has as well? So it's like, to me, it's like it's going to be a fairly low volume type of affair unless, you know, Fialho is able to bring that early pressure to him and find an early finish. So I don't really have a strong take here. I think Pereira's probably going to end up winning, but I wouldn't have any interest in betting it. Yeah.
So we move on. We have the first of 2 UFC title bouts. Craig, I'm going to start with you here. I heard your and your brother's breakdown of this on a Clint show on Monday. It was actually quite fun to listen to while I was bored out of my mind doing the dishes on Monday night. So take it away here. I want to hear your breakdown again.
So what are you, like a Dawn guy? Palm olive? What are you using?
Yeah, Dawn, I think.
Dawn, okay, you think. Listen, he was a lot more animated than I was, but when I look at this one, I mean, Davison Figueredo is one of those guys, and it was like Charles Oliveira. When we were getting ready for his fights, he invested so much in his camp and his hometown, his friends and family. We're all glowing up, right? And Davison was doing the same thing until he lost, and then he left everybody behind, and now he's come to the States. And that's all right, and that's fine because he's got a good gym. I mean, Henry Cejudo is apparently the coach to the stars. Like, John Jones is training with him. Yuri Prohashka is going to go train with him. Like, it's a weird thing, and nobody's really focusing in on fight ready. I think guys like Santino DeFranco, a striking coach like Eddie Cha, they're going to pick up on different things that Brandon Moreno does, and they're going to help out Davison Figueredo. Maybe move a little bit more to your right. Maybe, worry about that leg kick a little bit more, so on and so forth. So I like the moves that Figueredo's made ahead of this fight, but he's also not the youngest guy in this division, in a division where age, unless you're Joseph Benavidez, like it really does come at you very quickly. For me, I think Brandon Moreno is at the apex of what you're going to get out of Moreno, and I'd be hard pressed not to take Moreno in a third fight.
Yeah, I understand that. I guess for me, it's a weird fight to break down because like in the first fight, I bet Brandon Moreno at like plus 250, something wild like that. But the funny thing is, it was a draw. But at the end of the fight, I was like, I didn't really feel like I made a very good bet. I kind of felt like it was a pretty clear 49-46 biggie, where he lost the point, and it surprised me on a lot of levels because I've always been of the mind Fig can't keep a high output. That's why he doesn't throw strikes. Fig doesn't have very good cardio, and he went out there, went 5, and went hard at Moreno for 5 and won the 5th round in that fight. And then we had the fight that happened this past summer, and I don't know that I've ever seen a fight-to-fight decline as severe as Davison Figueiredo's decline from their last fight together. I don't know if it was the weight cut. I don't know if it's just that, Moreno took a more aggressive approach with him. It looked like after the initial knockdown, he just never seemed to get his bearings back. Not that he was hurt or anything, but it was weird. He just seemed very, very disinterested. And one of the beauties of this sport, or more cringeworthy aspects, I don't know, you decide, but it's a one-on-one sport, right? We'll watch an NBA game or a hockey game or a football game, and someone being off for like, it wasn't a great day for them. Or LeBron went 9 for 30. It was a pretty rough day for him. And we don't really think about the fact that, in MMA, in a one-on-one sport, you're almost never getting both of these guys' best games at the same time, right? Sometimes people just have massive off nights for whatever reason, which is even more enhanced in this sport by the fact that, especially in the case of a guy like Figgy, he's cutting 25 pounds. So again, trying to make something out of that fight, it's very hard to know what to make out of it. It could be he's done. It could be he can't fight at 125 anymore. It also could just be he had a bad camp or for whatever reason just had a bad fight that night. We don't really know, and that's kind of the weird thing for me here because, like, if you told me going into fight number 2 I was getting plus 150 on Big after the first fight, I'd be like, I am smashing that. This is crazy. Like, I more or less thought the minus 200 in fight 2 was right going into the fight. But instead, based on the last fight, I'm like, yeah, Moreno should be a pretty big fave. So I don't know. Like, it's impossible for me to know how this plays out. If they both come with their A games, I favor Fig pretty significantly, to be honest. But I just saw this fight 6 months ago. Like, can I really believe that they're going to both come with their A games? I don't know. So I guess I think the values of Fig, I would need a better number than where it is now. But yeah, I don't know. I lean Fig, but it's going to be a really interesting fight here. What do you think, Wags?
I think it's a combination of two things, actually. You touched on it, the weight cut, but I don't think really anybody's brought this up, which I saw Moreno talking about it a little bit the lead up to this fight, but it's the confidence in it. The confidence from that first fight going into the second fight. I mean, just drawing with Figueredo. I mean, he talked about it in the interview into this fight. He's like, it's the God of War, but he's not really invincible. I went 5 rounds with him. I beat him in the last fight. It's like he has the confidence now to actually bring the fight to Davison. So that's why, I know Clint touched on the over 3.5. I think that could get sweaty at times a little bit, because I do think that grappling edge is there for Moreno, but I'm kind of leaning on that side. I more so think this fight gets into later rounds. We probably go the distance.
Yeah, I don't really hate it, especially because
Yeah.
You're
So I
gonna
guess
say
I guess my last point I would say is like I think that at like minus 150 would be a decent spot for me to actually like bet Moreno, even though like I know I didn't bet him in that second fight where he was plus 200, but like coming down those two fights again, it's like he's got cardio to outmatch Fig, the durability, volume, decent enough striking, decent enough wrestling. It's like where's the hole really? It's like the power shots from Fig, yeah, but like I don't know. I like Moreno a lot, obviously, as you can see, but trying to be unbiased.
Yeah, no, believe me, I get it. It's very weird with regards to the over because it's like they went to absolute war in the first fight, and it went 25 full minutes. Davison went 15 minutes with Jussier Formiga and spent 8.5 minutes with him on top of him and never got tapped out in that fight. Yeah, it was just a huge decline. But I mean, if he's even 80% of what he was, I like the over here. I don't think that's a bad look, to be honest. But moving on, we have. I get, what's interesting is like this, you could almost label this a super fight. It's not being labeled that. It oddly seems like a kind of under the radar pay-per-view, despite having, one of the most electric heavyweight champions in the sport's history against probably the best prospect we've ever had in the sport's history. We got Cyril Gane, Francis Ngannou. Legs, what do you think about this fight?
Well, I think the reason why it's not talked about a super fight enough is just because the drama on the backside with Francis and Dana. I think with this whole trying to leave for boxing and whatnot, trying to get paid more, and I think that's causing a lot of drama here. And I saw there was a funny meme where it's just like, oh, how the UFC is portraying this fight, and it's just Gane versus Gane because they're not really talking about Francis a lot. And I think that's kind of true. And I think he is getting pretty disrespected here, but it's like, how disrespectful can you be? It's like I think Gane is the better technician everywhere, better cardio, more reliable volume. It's just like Francis has to land that one and 2 rounds, maybe 2.5 rounds to do it. I don't know. I was toying around with Ngannou, no scorecards at minus 132, which pretty much means that if Francis knocks him out, it's a cash. If it goes to decision, obviously it's a push, and then if Gane knocks him out or submits him, then it's a loss. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of just. I think it's just a pass all around. Like I think Gane minus 150 now more so makes sense, but
yeah,
not a fight I'm looking to play.
Craig, what are your thoughts?
So you touched on it in the last fight, the co-main event, recency bias, this and that. And I look at the fight like that. You got Figueredo taking on Moreno. It's been 6 months, right? And then you've got Brian Ortega coming back. Well, do we just kind of forget about everything that he did or the last fight that he was in? And then you kind of look at this fight coming up here. Do I look at the sparring footage? Do I care about any of that? No, I don't. Come on, that's all silly. Do I care what Fernand Lopez says about this one? Of course I don't. I look at the fighters that are in front of me. And yes, Francis Ngannou has made big improvements, whether you want to admit it or not. For him to be able to sprawl out of that takedown attempt from Stipe, to spin around, take his back, try and pound him out, and then to really just floor him in the second round. Like, he definitely did make improvements. You look at the first round of his fight against Stipe at UFC 220, and he's just going in there like he did his second to last fight against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Like, yes, he's made improvements, but he still can go back to what he does before. Now, to your point, Cyril Gane is such a technician. Rozenstruik, when he's on, is a very good technician, a very good kickboxer. Once he establishes distance, he's a great striker too. When Gane fought him, he couldn't really figure him out. Yeah, it might have been a boring fight, but Gane fought to a smart game plan. You look at Gane when he fought Volkov, he ate some pretty hard shots in that fight, whether you like that or not. At least you've seen him test it. And he just fought, a one-hitter quitter, if you want to call Derek Lewis that, the best knockout puncher in the UFC's heavyweight division. And he passed that test with flying colors. Now, Derek attributed that to being, the fact it was a hometown crowd in Houston, but I'm pretty sure he's fought in Houston before. So it's really hard to kind of look at it that way. But when I look at this fight, I've said it time and again, Gane sometimes will step back with his head on the line, and I hate it, and it scares me because a guy like Francis can connect easily on that. But I like all of the things about Gane to one of the things of Francis. So for that reason, I have Gane in the fight, but I can definitely see how you take Ngannou and definitely inside the distance. I don't think he's winning a decision. If he did, I would be very surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The thing for me is, though, like, I understand all the Gane takes about Gane being the superior technician, the superior fighter. They're all right, but they're all right in every Francis fight, Like, it is, I will say, I think Gane is probably the best striker in the heavyweight division. But it doesn't change the fact that, Francis only really needs one shot. And sometimes, and look, I'm always the guy that tends to fade KOs. But I have wondered recently if I just kind of underestimate the likelihood of it happening. And just for example, like you take a look at Francis's knockdown rate, it's about 6.5%. That means if he lands 20 strikes, you favor him to land a knockdown in the fight. Like that is bonkers. Like we're talking about a level of power we've never seen in the sport before. And as such, it's kind of like one of these things where I'm like, I don't think against anybody you can really project Francis to have worse than a 40 to 50% chance to win, because his margins, being a very durable guy who's also very fast and very athletic, means his margins to win the fight are enormously wide. Like he doesn't need to do anything else. He has to do one thing. So like if you say, I was having a conversation with somebody fairly sharp about this, who's like, yeah, Francis has 6 to 10 bursts in him and then he's gassed. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree, but if one of those connects, that's probably the fight,
10 bursts is a good amount of bursts that I take a chance on it, the even money.
That's what I'm saying. And like, there's something, look, Gane is excellent at distance management, unquestionably. His volume has been superior, but one thing, we're talking about a guy that puts up absurd volume at heavyweight against a guy who has suppressed volume to an almost comical degree, at heavyweight. Only Francis's opponents for his career only attempt about 4.5 strikes a minute. Like that is wild, to be honest with you. And on top of which, one of the biggest advantages to Gane and how he fights is how long and how tall he is. He's actually big for the heavyweight division. I know he's not really thought of as being that because of how mobile he is, but the dude is huge. This is going to be the first time in his career he's fighting somebody with a longer reach than him and Francis. And Craig, you touched on it, that tendency to back up. I don't think Francis has made many technical striking improvements at all in his career, but what he does do quite effectively is cover distance fast. Yes, he's going to throw wide hooks, but he throws them with alarming speed for a man of that size. So I think the opportunities in this fight for Francis are going to be there. And so I don't think Francis is winning a decision either. I think you have to be kind of crazy to think that he's going to win a decision against Gane, but I don't really think, I think by the nature of how Francis fights, he's probably going to carry his power a bit later here. I really would be surprised if Gane goes and tries to wrestle him too aggressively. Gane really struggled to get Rosenstruck down, and Francis is much more powerful and has better takedown defense in general than Jairzinho does. And so I think it's going to be fairly low paced. I could see Francis keeping his power in this fight a bit longer than he normally does. Do I want to bet Francis? Not really, because I think Gane is going to be awesome and is probably the future of the division. But look, the Francis line is blowing out, and if it gets to plus 150, I'm going to take a poke at it. Like I just feel at that point, it's like I have a guy who has the highest knockdown rate in UFC history and the most knockouts, like at his age or with his number of fights in UFC history. How do I not take a poke at that number? I don't know, man. I'm not passionate about it, but I do think I kind of think Francis's explosiveness and how dangerous he is being underrated to a pretty significant degree by just about everybody. Like I haven't talked to anybody this week who I like really consider like sharp that isn't like, yeah, Gane's going to handle him. Which, when everybody's lining up on the same side, it usually starts to get a pretty weird vibe about it. And that's the vibe I'm kind of getting here. So I don't know. I'm leaning Francis. I still don't know if I'll take the dive, but yeah. So that's going to do it for our show tonight. Craig, you want to pump your stuff up here before we go?
Me?
Yeah. Do you want to tell everybody where your podcast is, where to find you?
Jumpins. Yeah, you can find me at Fight Night Picks, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you can find Fight Night Picks, we're probably there.
Awesome. Well, Craig, thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. I had a great time with you. One of the more knowledgeable guests we've had on.
You'll have to get the more fired up Alan the next time to talk about Brandon Moreno. It'll have to be one of those guys.
we can get both of you guys on for sure next time.
Yeah. That would be fun. And yeah, as usual, we got Lags at Danny_Lags and myself, John at MMA Fox. Guys, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. We'll be back in 2 weeks breaking down the next underwhelming fight night card coming up for UFC Vegas 47. Craig, once again, thank you for joining us. Guys, good luck on your bets this weekend, and take it easy, everyone.